Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar titled Beyond Resilience, Making a Difference When It Matters Most, brought to you by the AHA's Physician Alliance and the American Association for Physician Leadership. To present today's session, we are pleased to have with us Dr. Dan Diamond. Dr. Diamond is the author of the book Beyond Resilience, Trench-Tested Tools to Thrive Under Pressure. He is a clinical assistant professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine and is a part-time practicing physician at Multi-Care Immediate Clinic. Dr. Diamond has a passion for equipping people to perform under pressure. He founded and serves as the director of the nation's first state-affiliated medical disaster and response team, and he has responded to a variety of international disasters. Most recently, he responded to the typhoon in the Philippines, and he serves as the medical director for the medical team's international first response team to Haiti. Following Hurricane Katrina, he played a strategic role as director of the Mass Casualty Triage Unit at the New Orleans Convention Center. With that, let me turn the call over to Dr. Diamond.
Thanks, Kristin. I appreciate it a bunch. We're going to have some fun today. I'd like to keep this casual. Let's just jump over to the voting and see how it looks. We've only had 9 people vote so far. This is on how 2018 is going for you personally so far. One person says 2018 stinky. The other, I got 2 people coming in saying it's so-so, and 6 saying that it's spectacular. So please go ahead to menti.com. Use the code 472584. You can do that on your phone if you want, and vote. This is going to be an important part of this presentation because I'm going to poll you several times as we go through this today. And let's go ahead and dive into the presentation. If you need to, you can stay here and do the voting piece, and we'll come back to this and do some more voting in just a minute. So let me dive over and we'll begin. I'd like you to imagine that it is Sunday afternoon. In fact, this Sunday afternoon was May 22nd, 2011, and my friend Steve was home with his family. He has a wife and 3 kids, and they were just having one of these nice, relaxing experiences. And all of a sudden, the siren goes off. You can hear it, and if you live in Joplin, Missouri, and you hear this siren, this is something you always take very seriously. But then seconds later, Steve's ears popped, and that's bad, because when that happens, that means that there's a massive change in the atmospheric pressure, and you're about to get hit by a tornado. He grabbed his 4-year-old and his 6-year-old, shoved them in the hall closet. They shut the door. His wife laid down in front of the door so the door wouldn't be pried open and his kids sucked out. They put their 1-year-old son in between his wife's legs, and then Steve laid down over the top and held on for dear life. Moments later, they were hit by a multi-vortex Category EF5 tornado that exploded their house. The kids were in the closet screaming and yelling, "Let us out! Let us out! Let us out!" Stuff was flying everywhere, and then it was all over in a matter of about 3 minutes. Steve went from being a homeowner to being homeless. The only thing that was still standing was the closet where his 2 boys were. And Steve, his 3 children, and his wife all survived with just a few little scratches. So what I'd like you to do now is imagine with me for a moment that this just happened to you, and this is how your day started off today, where everything that belonged to you just was destroyed, and you lost everything. So internally, when this happens, you're starting to have some sort of an internal dialogue. And what I'd like you to do is think about the first 3 words, not a sentence, not a 3-word sentence, but 3 different words that grasp what you're really feeling at this moment. And let's switch back over to the poll. And we'll look at the first 3 words that come to your mind. And as you vote and put these words in, this will populate a word cloud for us, and we'll get some idea about what people are thinking about when they lose everything. So again, you go to menti.com. The code is 472584. You should see there the questions. sad, desperation, alive and grateful, disbelief, shock, relieved, angry. We've had 4 people vote, 5 now. By the way, you can put whatever words you want to in there, and if you're thinking, well, you'll offend me, don't worry, this software will automatically take your less than appropriate words and put in some other characters, so we'll have an idea what you were thinking. So feel free to have at it, whatever it is that you're feeling. What I really want are the words that you're thinking. So we have shock at the very center, sad, angry are big ones that many people have had, angry, grateful, disbelief. Those are the highlights, shock, grateful, sad, and angry. Let's switch back over. So when I came back from Hurricane Katrina, it was the most profound experience of my entire life. You know, I'm a small-town family practice doc, and because of my experience doing disasters around the world, ended up running the medical triage facility at the New Orleans Convention Center. It was the only functioning medical facility in the entire city of New Orleans. So I came home with a lot of questions. And one of the questions that I had was not why are there so many victims, because we knew that we were going to have a lot of victims. In fact, we had 50,000 body bags on pallets. That wasn't what got me. What really got me was, why is it that some people become victims and some people become unstoppable? So I really began this quest to understand how it is that people, when they encounter intense pressure, devastating circumstances, can still stay engaged and still make a difference and still impact the lives of other people rather than disengaging and becoming victims. So that's what I would like to share with you today. I mean, there's a lot of talk now in the healthcare world about burnout. We're going to explore that a little bit today. The 3 symptoms of burnout are emotional exhaustion, a sense of being detached, and the sense of being ineffective, or does it really make any difference? Would anybody notice if I left the job and went and did something else, because I don't know that what I'm doing is making much of a difference at all. When you look at the statistics, they're shocking. 54.4% of physicians are experiencing burnout. Now, I think that one of the tendencies that we all have is to think that everybody wants to say that they're better than the average driver, but we can't all be better than the average driver. And a lot of organizations look at this number and say, well, no, at our place it's not that bad. But I would venture to say that it probably is this bad or darn close to it. And you really don't know until you start polling people. But a question that I have for you today is, if it's 54.4% of physicians, what percent of your nurses, what percent of your pharmacists, what percent of your lab folks, and what percent of you as leaders and administrators in the organization are struggling with burnout? I think that's a question that we need to talk about, because it's difficult to improve this situation until we all come back to work and function again. So let me poll you again on this. Our next question today is, so what do? Are you the C-suite? Are you a president, EVP, vice president? Are you director, manager? Do you do patient care, like you're actually hands-on with patients? Or are you part of the state association staff? Where do you fit in? So we've got quite a few people that are doing direct patient care, some hospital leadership staff, C-suite, lots of directors and managers. Next question, how long have you been doing it? Less than 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years, or more than 20 years? So lots of experience. Be interesting to track and see if the people that are less than 5 years are less burned out than the people that are more than 20 years. But I'm not going to do that to you today. It's tempting. Looks like our average is 10 to 20 years. That's awesome. I appreciate having that experience and that wisdom. How about this? If we get that down to it for you, and I promise I'm not tracking your results on this. I'm not going to harass you. But if you feel burned out, these symptoms of burnout, do they apply to you? Do you feel emotionally exhausted? Do you feel detached from people? Do you feel like your work really doesn't matter? Go ahead and answer up on that. Let's see where you are. When you look at the literature, the number one most common symptom of burnout is feeling emotionally exhausted. So the ball that's down below here that I'm showing on the screen, that 0.5, is where the average number is falling in. So of the people that are answering, and obviously you don't have to answer if you don't want to, it looks like there's a significant amount, almost half, that are feeling at least one of the symptoms of burnout, and over half are feeling emotionally exhausted. All right, let's dive back in here and we'll talk about this. When I start thinking about burnout and performance under pressure and resilience, one of the things that we have to think about is the cost to patients. And the cost to patients can be very high because we know that error rates go up, medical error rates, surgical error rates go up when people that are having direct contact with the patients are burned out. We also know that patient satisfaction scores are impacted by burnout, and it can become a very costly problem for hospitals. What does it really cost the organization when you start looking at turnover? Well, depending on the study that you read and depending on the type of physician, it can cost somewhere between $165,000 to replace an ER doc, up to over $1 million for some of the other specialties, including primary care, because of the downstream revenue loss that happens when a patient leaves. The average 300-bed hospital is losing $4.4 million a year on nurse turnover. These are some expensive issues, and it's tempting to think, well, we can just replace them, but that replacement process is so expensive in terms of the morale of the rest of the people that are left behind, the team, the recruiting, et cetera. What does it cost you on an individual basis? I've been burned out. I know what that feels like when I come home at the end of the day. When I'm burned out, I really feel like I don't have that much more to give at home, so there's some personal costs. And then there's this sense when you're burned out that there's a feeling of loss. Like I went into healthcare because I wanted to make a difference, and I feel like it's just not what I signed up for. And if you're doing direct patient care, hands-on with the patients, there's this fear, and people don't talk much about this, but am I so emotionally exhausted and detached and ineffective that I might actually harm a patient? And that's really costly when that happens. This is not our goal at all. This is the goal, is that we put the joy back in medicine. We have teams that are back showing up at work again and encouraging each other and supporting each other. Let me tell you about the perfect storm that hit my office. This is my medical assistant, Dana, and she, back when this first happened, had already been written up 3 times. And if you're in HR, you might think, gee, if you write them up 3 times, don't you let them go? Well, sometimes you write somebody up and let them go, and then you hire somebody else, and the replacement is worse than the first person that you had. So I wasn't in a hurry to get rid of her. I just wanted to help her do better. But I would define a perfect storm as 3 storm fronts coming in to wreck your day. Storm front number 1, Dana was nasty to work out, burned out, cantankerous, had this mindset of the victim, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Second storm front that hit my office was I had one of my partners that was at one of our remote clinics that lacked the ability to say no. And so you know what that means. Every drug-seeking patient for a 500-mile radius had their phone, had his office number on a favorites in their phone. So anytime he would go on vacation, those of us that were taking call for him would get slammed with requests for narcotics. So my plan was going to be to either figure out when he was going to go on vacation so I could be on vacation at the same time, or when he retired, I wanted to be sure that I retired the week before he retired because I didn't want to inherit these patients with these demands for narcotics. So that was Stormfront number 2. Stormfront number 3, he got fired, and I was on call. So it hit our office with great enthusiasm. At about 10:30, Dana loses it. She takes her headset off, slams it on the table, starts pounding on the table, screaming, "You got to do something about this. You got to do something about this. This is ridiculous. We've already had over 40 patients calling in wanting narcotics. You got to do something about it." And I watched her, shocked, and thinking, oh my gosh, because I'm a family practice doc, we want to have an environment in our clinic where people feel loved and they feel safe. And we had 3 exam rooms full of patients that just heard and felt this explosion through the wall. That was the perfect storm that hit my office. We live in a difficult world in healthcare. We're charged to first do no harm, but frankly, we're living in a harmful environment. I mean, for every hour that I spend with a patient, I end up spending 2 hours with the EMR on average, according to a time motion study published by Mayo. For every hour, I spend 2 hours with the EMR. So if you check, if you talk to your IT people and you look at it on the backside, you can log in and see when your providers are logging in and doing their charts. They're doing their charts in the evenings. They're getting up at home on Saturday mornings and getting caught up on their charts on Saturday mornings. This has a hugely negative impact on people's satisfaction, their engagement, and their morale. This is the command center for the insurance companies. If you look in the upper right-hand corner here, right there, you'll see the sign that says prior authorizations. This is the command center for the insurance companies where they figure out how to turn the pressure up on us to make us so miserable that we won't spend their precious money. And so we have prior authorizations, we have formularies, we have all kinds of obstacles with the payers that we have to jump through to make sure that we don't spend their money. Readmissions, another example of the insurance companies turning the pressure up on us to wreck our day. And so it's not surprising that we have significant issues with turnover from the clinical side, but from the administrative side. The average CEO at a hospital now stays at a hospital between 1 and 2 years before they're gone because it's such a difficult environment to work in. And when that happens, it's kind of like this phenomenon of playing tug of war. Once you lose the first couple of people at the front end of the rope, the back end becomes very, very difficult. Now, if you look at the guy at the very end of the rope, I don't think he's pulling very hard to begin with anyway. But there is this sense of the more turnover that we have, the more turnover that we have because we start losing people, and it becomes very difficult for the people that are left on the rope. So we come up with 2 current strategies. And it's fascinating if you look at the literature on this now. The 2 main strategies on how do we deal with this harsh environment and the turnover and the burnout is, number 1, let's just make everybody more resilient. Well, that's kind of like the gladiators. They had 4 different schools in Rome for the gladiators where they received the best medical care, the best diet. In fact, they gave them fortified barley. They had their training and all this stuff in order to make them more resilient or last longer. Now, gladiators also had a 50% burnout rate because they fought to the death. That's a difficult strategy. We can only get so far by making people more resilient. So the other side of the pendulum is, well, it's the institution's fault. we just need to blame it all on them. I mean, we're working in these harsh environments, the insurance companies, all the things that I just mentioned. How could anybody last in a situation like that? The problem is not with me as a provider. Clearly the problem is with the organization. So we have this two camps. And when you look at the literature now, what they're saying is that 80% of the problem is the institution problem and 20% is the individual. I don't know about you, but I look at this and think, I'm not sure that's very helpful. In fact, I think this idea of the institution versus the individual is not helpful at all, and I'll explain to you why here in a moment. When I speak, whether I'm doing keynotes or if I'm doing workshops or if I'm doing one-on-one coaching, I'm convinced that we need to take a different view than just saying, well, it's the institution problem or we got to make people more resilient. It is a very complex problem that involves us as individuals. How do I show up at work? My squad or my team, my immediate team that I work with, the organization or the system, and then the patients that we serve. The new model that's come out by the National Academy of Medicine has the patient at the very center. I think the patient needs to be part of this equation, but we've sacrificed a lot of people on the altar of putting the patient first. So we need to look at self, squad, system, and serve. We could have a series of workshops or webinars on this. Let's just dive in for the sake of today and look at the impact of self. Because I believe that if we don't start with self, we're not going to get very far. So let's take a look at self, and specifically, I want to look at some core issues of why this is important and how this works. So when I start thinking about these ideas, I look at it from this perspective. When we look at performance, we tend to look at the fruit that people produce. And sometimes that fruit is incredible, like Honeycrisp apples, and sometimes it's nasty and full of worms. The fruit that we produce is actually driven by the actions that we take. And so we'll say things like, well, they made some bad choices and did some things, and it led to this fruit not being so good with regard to their performance or their outcomes. But this is the seen part of the world, the outside. There's another side down below that, and that's the unseen. Well, at least some of it's unseen. The emotions that we experience are partially above the ground where people can see them, but part of the emotions are deep within, and we don't share them, and so people may not see them. These emotions that we experience are driven by the words that we ponder, and this is one of those concepts that until you're aware of this, you're vulnerable to it. But once you discover the power of the words that we ponder in this internal dialogue, it has a very significant impact on the fruit that we produce. Down below the words that we ponder are what I want to talk about today, and that's the mindset that we choose. So the mindset that I choose determines the words that I ponder, which determines the emotions that I experience, the actions that I take, and then the fruit that I produce. Mindset is incredibly powerful. Let's take a deeper look. When I was in Katrina, the fascinating thing as somebody with I have a strong background in psychiatry as a family practice doc. It was about 75% of what I did was psychiatry. So somebody with a psychiatric perspective like I have, walking into a disaster zone, this is the perfect classroom to observe human behavior because there's nowhere to hide. It's not like being at the hospital where people can hide behind their roles and their positions of power. When you're in a disaster, everybody's exposed. We all were living on the street. I'll never forget meeting a woman that was being interviewed by CNN, and she was screaming at the CNN reporter, "When is George Bush going to bring me my food?" To which I replied, "He's not." It's interesting that some people think that it's all about them and they need to take. So they look to somebody else to solve their problems. Julian Rotter back in the 50s talked about this idea of locus of control. Do you view the power as being internal to you or external and things happen to you? And victims have this external locus of control. They believe that somebody else has the power and things happen to them. The other part of this interview, though, was that this woman was holding her little daughter's hand. And it took me a while to figure out what really bothered me about the interview. And the thing that bothered me the most was that she was not saying, when is George Bush going to bring my daughter some food? She was saying, when is George Bush going to bring me my food? And when we slide into this victim mindset, it's this mindset of the powerless taker. It's the rallying cry of the victim mindset is, help me, help me. By the way, today when we're talking about mindsets, I want to stress the idea that we're not talking about 4 different types of people. In fact, if I set you up on this to just look at this as a way to label 4 different types of people, I have failed. We're going to talk about 4 different types of mindset. Let me take you back over for another question. So I've got 5 different scenarios here for you on your poll, and there's 2 different choices here. When I start my day, I usually feel, and you're going to have 2 choices. You feel like you're powerful, or do you feel powerless? Do you feel like you're a giver, or do you feel like you're a taker? And then these are different scenarios. When you're under intense pressure, do you feel like do you still feel like you have the power? Do you feel it's about you or about other people? When the people that you're supervising make mistakes, do you feel like you have power or not? Do you feel like it's all about you or all about them? What about when coworkers don't do their work and it ends up back on your desk? And for those of you that are in the clinical world, when your partners don't do their charts and they're gone the next day and you have to pick up the slack? And what about if your boss is a knucklehead? And if you are the boss, what about if your significant other is a knucklehead? Do you feel like you have power? Do you feel powerless? Do you feel like it's all about them or all about you? Go ahead and fill those in. Let's take a look. Again, I'm not tracking your results. I'm not going to publish your results. This is just for us today. And don't overanalyze this and feel like you need to put a lot of deep thought into it. This is just first thing that comes to your mind as you're going through these different scenarios. How do you feel? What we see is that there's a pattern that forms, that most of us start our day off thinking, I have the power to make a difference and it's about giving to other people. But then as we go through the day, our mindset shifts. And as we encounter increasing levels of pressure, our mindset can shift down towards the feeling of being powerless and feeling like we need to look out for ourselves. You know, we hear that. Sometimes people say, somebody's got to look out for number one. What's really fascinating is if we look at these now, I can hover over and take a look at individual votes. We'll see that there's quite a variety for even first thing in the morning. Some people start off feeling like they have lots of power, but they have to look out for themselves. If we dive down in here to what do I do when my coworkers don't do their work, a lot of us, most of us, will slide into that lower left corner and feel like I don't have any power and I got to start looking out for myself. If my boss is a knucklehead, some of us still feel powerful. Some of us still stay on purpose. But there's only a few that look at this like, I both have the power to make a difference and I have purpose. So the point of showing you this is that mindset is fluid. Let's go back and take a look. Now, I assume that most of you know what this is. For those of you that don't, this is a picture of a Polaroid picture, and there may be some of you that have never experienced a Polaroid picture before. They're kind of fun when you're trying to develop them. If you want to hurry up and develop them, you know, they come out of the camera. and then you have to put them in your armpit and warm them up, and then you shake them around a little bit and put them back in your armpit and warm them back up again. This one is a picture of nothing, because I wanted to come up with some sort of an image that you could ponder later that would capture this idea of the next type of mindset, and that is the mindset of the bystander. Bystanders have a heart that's in the right place, and they say somebody should do something for these people, but they don't feel like they have the power to make a difference. They struggle with doubt. They look at it like, somebody should do something about this, but what could I do? And there is a huge part of the workforce that slides into this mindset on a regular basis. And they show up to work, and they'll do the work that you assign to them and check off the boxes, but they're not going to take the initiative to do any sort of work that would actually improve the environment, because they'll sit back with this mindset and say, somebody should do something about this, and it never occurs to them that they might be the person. This next slide, I realize is a shock of a slide, and to put a slide like this in a presentation kind of gets your attention, and I did it on purpose, because we had people that were shooting at the rescue workers. I mean, seriously, if you ever want to get rescued, would you really shoot at the rescue people? Does that make any sense whatsoever? I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me. If you don't come and rescue me right now, I'm going to shoot at you. And if we yell back, well, we'll get you on the next trip, the boat is full, they'll shoot at the people on the boat. We saw this happen over and over and over again in Katrina. It was wild. And I remember in the midst of this when it was happening, and I was not in the boat when it happened, but I remember hearing these stories and thinking, who does that? Who shoots at the rescue people? But then when I got back home and I was thinking about it, I started thinking, well, I mean, I've never shot at anybody. I would never do that. And then I started thinking a bit more about it and thinking, well, I've shot emails at people where I felt like I had all the power and it was all about me, where I became a powerful taker. I've shot looks at people. I've been married for 35 years, and so I've definitely shot looks and comments at my wife from time to time, thinking it's all about me. I have the power, and I'm the taker, and my rallying cry becomes, for me. An interesting mindset. When I discovered these mindsets after Katrina and started doing this work, it really became not as much fun to take on the role of the controller. And it's easy to see when you put it in this stark contrast of a disaster world, how ineffective it is to shoot at the rescue people. But sometimes we do that when we take on this mindset of it's about me, and we shoot comments and emails and looks at people that we are dependent upon for our very survival, or at least our success. This is a picture of Juliet Saucy, and I first met her in Katrina. We were a couple of days into the whole thing, and she came up and she had this blue shirt on that said New Orleans Emergency Medical Services, and on the back, in big letters, it said paramedic. And so I said, boy, am I glad you're here. I've got just the spot for you. I'm going to put you over here in the red zone and have you work with Dr. Bob. We could really use somebody that could start IVs. And so she goes over and starts working with him. And about 6 hours into this, I started thinking, she is the smartest paramedic I've ever worked with. So I grabbed one of the other EMS guys and I said, hey, is Juliet really a paramedic? And the guy says, oh, no, man, she's the director of emergency medical services for the whole city of New Orleans. And at which point I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, what have I said? What have I done? How do I get my foot out of my mouth? I went over to her. I said, Juliet, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that you were the director of EMS. I'm so sorry. We work for you. Forgive me for coming in and setting myself up as the director of the triage unit here. We could stand down, and I'm backpedaling like crazy. And she said, you have no idea. We've been sleeping in our cars. We've been People have been shooting at the rescue workers. We're working 18 to 20-hour days. We begged God that you would come. Don't you dare stand down. I said, well, I'm happy to support you any way I can, but I'm just sorry that I didn't know who you were. And she said, well, I'll come in and I'll work under you and help, and then I've got meetings and stuff that I need to go to around the town. And I said, well, I'll do anything for you. But I do have a question. What's with the shirt that says paramedic on the back? Are you trying to throw off the out-of-town guys? And I'll never, ever forget her response. She looked me right in the eyes and said, it's the only shirt I own. I just bought a new house, and I hadn't moved into my new house, but I lost both homes. I lost everything. I've been in these clothes for 5 days, sleeping in the back of an ambulance. And my jaw just hit the floor. I thought, man, would I take on this mindset if I just lost everything? Would I think about, I have the power to make a difference? It's not about me. I'm going to be a powerful giver. That mindset is so powerful. And even though the media didn't show you this after Katrina, we saw it over and over again in the triage unit that there were some people that decided to put other people first and realize that they had the power to make a difference. So my big idea today, if you've been kind of snoozing and doing your email while we're doing this webinar, now's the time to come back to the screen, take a look at this. Here's my big idea for you. We go into healthcare with this idea that we have the power to make a difference when we want to help other people. I've met very few people that said, well, I wanted to go into medicine so I could become rich. No, we go in because we want to serve other people, and we believe that we have the power to make a difference. And then something happens. We encounter government regulations, ineffective teams, prior authorizations, the electronic medical record, and we shift mindsets into either the bystander, the victim, or the controller. But there's a problem with these three mindsets, and that is that these three mindsets are unfulfilling. And I looked up the word fulfilling. It comes from the Old English word fulfillin', and originally that term was used to describe the process of loading supplies on a ship to get it ready for a journey. So if we shift into these mindsets that are unfulfilling, it's not very long before we deplete our stores and the tank is empty. Once the tank goes empty, it's a very short distance to being burned out with exhaustion, feeling detached, and feeling ineffective. When that happens, that has a profound impact on me as an individual and how I show up to work. That foundational shift in me as an individual has a huge impact on my team, and it has a huge impact on the organization. In fact, I strongly believe that we cannot improve the organization until we get people to shift back. And what I'm talking about is not fluffy, wellness. There's a lot of people have this opinion that wellness is just fluffy stuff. No, it's not. It's hard work. Wellness is hard work, and it takes a perspective that we want to be involved in this to make it better, but it's going to be difficult. This idea of moving from being a controller, a victim, or a bystander back to having the mindset of a thriver is crucial. In fact, imagine the impact if you took some of the people in your organization that are now burned out and got them to come back to being thrivers again. What could that do to your organization? Well, I actually think that it's like turning the power back on again. It changes everything. Most organizations are having this conversation about how do we get people to go from being disengaged to becoming engaged. I'm convinced this is the wrong conversation. And yet we spend a lot of money talking about how do we get people to become more engaged. If you look at the Q12, the Gallup Q12, which is what a lot of organizations are using to track their employee engagement, you'll find if you look at those questions that a good percentage of those questions actually deal with how do I feel when I show up at work? How do I feel about the place that I work? But I can tell you from experience that when we showed up in Haiti, there was no one on my team that looked around and said, wow, I feel so good about being here. I have a best friend that's here in Haiti with me. My supervisor gives me adequate feedback. Or how about this one? This is one of my favorite Q12 questions. I have everything that I need to do my job well. Now, when we get into these disaster situations, it's not this conversation that we have. The question that I ask, and where I would encourage you to take your organization, is not a conversation about engagement, but it's a conversation about being invested. Do you show up wanted to be part of making this place better? Are you willing to roll your sleeves up, to get dirty, to become invested, to make a difference in the organization? Remember Dana I talked about at the beginning, my medical assistant? The rest of the story with Dana is amazing. So I wrote out this 4-quadrant model that I just shared with you about the bystanders, victims, controllers, and thrivers. I wrote it out on a paper towel. I handed it to her, and I said, I just want you to think about this. And this was right after Katrina, just shortly after I got back. And I'm going to go see a patient. And when I went in to see a patient and came back out 15 minutes later, she was transformed. She was significantly different. In fact, it was as if I had a brand new MA. It was amazing. She said, while you were in there, I was thinking, and by the way, this was when we still had paper charts. Remember, the days of paper charts. It was such a great time. In fact, I would say that having paper charts and going through your first go live is like getting Ben Gay in your underwear. There's 4 phases of this. The first phase is, hey, this could be great. That lasts for a couple of seconds. And then there's this pain phase that is excruciating. And then third phase is everything goes numb and falls off. And then the fourth phase is it is what it is. So anyway, we had paper charts. And she said, we have an extra person here because we have a student this week, so we could send one of our staff to the other clinic. And they could work off your protocols. We could call if we had any questions, and we could take care of this problem. I said, that's a great idea. It's amazing. We called our medical director, got permission to do it. The medical director thought she was great. And over the next 3 months, Dana went on to become the most valuable medical assistant that I've ever worked with in my entire career. As we went from paper charts through our first go live and we got into the second phase and everybody's screaming and yelling and crying about how painful it is to go from paper charts to electronic medical records, Dana stands up and she says, we always have the ability to choose how we're going to respond, and it's not about us. It's about delivering better patient care. And I almost fell down. I thought, I came so close to firing her. And as we went through that go-live process, she became so valuable and the cheerleader that rallied the team and brought everybody back and helped with this attitude, this mindset of we have the power to make a difference, and it's not all about us. I've got some resources for you at the end of the presentation, and I'll put this slide back up at the very end during the Q&A. You just text the word diamond to 66866, and I'll send you a chapter of my sample chapter of my book, Beyond Resilience, Trench-Tested Tools to Thrive Under Pressure. I've got a white paper called Bind the Gap to talk about this idea of disengage, engage, invested, and how do you bring teams together, and a white paper on being burned out or fired up. A link to my TED Talk on how to make a difference when times are tough, and a link to my friend Tamit Sethi's TED Talk on 2 words that can change your life. So I'll put this back up in just a few minutes. As we look at the forecast for healthcare, I'm not sure which one of these hurricanes is the electronic medical record and which one is the federal government and their attempts to impact our healthcare system, but we do know that we have stormy times ahead, and it's not going to be easy. Remember this, and this is a quote from Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist captured by the Nazis during World War II, spent 7 years in the concentration camps, and was tortured. You have to have that background to understand the significance of this quote. Between the stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This is the thinking of the thriving mindset. Stuff happens, it comes along, it impacts me. I always have a choice. Remember the tree that I showed you at the beginning, that deep down at the bottom is that choice of what type of mindset I'm going to have, which determines the words that I ponder, the emotions that I experience, the actions that I take, and the fruit that I produce. Remember, mindset is fluid. This is not a set of tools to label the people that you encounter. This is a set of tools for us to take a deep look internally into how we show up at work. Remember, 2 questions. Question number 1, will I choose to be powerful or powerless when I encounter the difficult times? And question number 2, will I choose to be a taker or a giver? What's my purpose? It all begins with a mind shift back to being a thriver again. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we're going to open up for Q&A now. Brandon, you can go ahead and switch over. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put in your questions into the chat box, and I can see them from there. Comment about kind of like having having teachers have guns. You don't know who is the bad guy. I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm more than happy to talk with you offline if you want to shoot me a note. But that's a little on the political side. Will my slides be available? No, I'm not going to put my slides out for you, but I have the 2 white papers, which has the models in it. My experience has been that the slides, because I'm a storyteller and these are slides with a bunch of pictures, are not as helpful as having the white paper, which you can copy, share with your teams, do whatever you want to with it. We will have the recording available on the website, but not the slides specifically. And Kristin's telling me that the recording will be up on the website by the end of the week. Sherry, thanks for saying great information, and thanks for sharing. It's my privilege. I appreciate it. Teresa, thank you for saying that you appreciate the information. It's hard to change the mindset of people, and how do we interact with very negative people? That's a great question. That's a superb question. There's 2 aspects to that. First is, how do I show up? And I can only be responsible for my own mindset. But there are some strategies for dealing with people that have different types of mindsets. I'm doing some one-on-one coaching, so I'm more than happy to get involved and help you with the people that are really struggling within your organization. But one thing that may be helpful is to look at the barriers to shift. So from the other 3 mindsets, when shifting back into the thriver mindset. When I take on the mindset of the bystander, the main barrier that keeps me going from a bystander to a thriver is doubt. So I look at it and say, well, I'd like to help, I'd like to do something, but what could I do? Somebody else should do something. Those people are pretty easy to move by coming alongside of them and saying, I want you to come alongside me, and I'm going to walk you through this process of how to do it, and mentor them, and allow them to see it. And then once they do it, tell them, here's another project that I'd like you to do, and I'd like you to recruit a team and lead the team. And they'll look at you and go, seriously, I couldn't do that. And you say, well, you just did this, and it was great. It turned out awesome. Recruit your own team and check in with me, and I'm more than happy to walk you through that process. The controllers, when I'm taking on the controller mindset and feeling like I need to hold on tightly, and I have the power, and it's all about me, and I have to look out for number 1. When I'm looking at that, my barrier to getting over to the thriver's mindset is fear. I'm afraid that if I let go, that somebody else will take advantage of me. The best way that I know of to move those people is through mentorship, where they find somebody that they respect and look up to, and walk through that process, because it takes some pretty deep dive conversations sometimes to get through to that, to help them get to the point where they understand that this is really a fear-based mindset, and they need to take some small steps at the beginning and do some experiments to see what happens when they drop their guard. Unfortunately, we can't guarantee that they're not going to get hurt. But what I can say is that over time, the thrivers do better than the controllers. The thrivers become the most valuable people in the organization because they show up and say, what can I do to make the people on my team successful? And then they rally their teams to look at the teams around them and say, what can our team do to help the other teams be successful? And we don't care who gets the credit. When you take on that role of the thriver, you become so valuable that if people try to lay you off, there's a line of people into the CEO's office saying, you can't let that person go because they helped me with this project, this project, this project. They didn't claim any credit, but I know they helped me. So that's powerful. The victim mindset tends to be more along their barrier is a secondary gain. I had a patient one time that weighed about 450 pounds. I took care of her for about 20 years. And after about 15 years, we had a conversation that went something like this. I said, I'm going to ask you a question today, and I know it's going to make you angry. And she said, oh, Dr. Diamond, you've been my doctor for 15 years. You can ask me anything. I said, yeah, well, today I'm going to ask you something that's going to make you angry. And she said, oh, no, I won't get angry. I said, yeah, you will. The question is, do you really want to get well? She actually didn't get angry. She sat there for a moment, and she said, I actually don't know that I do. Because the way it is right now, when I go to family events like Thanksgiving and Christmas, they know that it's too hard for me to wash the dishes and stuff. So they'll say, we know it's difficult on you. Why don't you just go ahead and you can just sit on the couch. We got it. We're good. And if I get well and I lose all this weight, then I'm going to have to start doing the dishes. And I'm thinking to myself, I've spent 15 years trying to help you get well. We've been having the wrong conversation. So the barrier for the victim to get to the thriver quadrant is secondary gain. What am I getting out of staying like I am? There must be something, some sort of a reward that I get for not taking responsibility and not putting other people first. So, working with people, my experience is when people are deep into that victim mode, sometimes they need counseling. Although with Dana, all she needed to see was the 4-quadrant diagram. She didn't even hear this webinar. I didn't even walk her through it. She just had the 4 quadrants, and she did what we all do and said, where do I fit in this whole thing? And it was really a breakthrough moment for her. So hopefully that helps on how to move different people. But start with yourself for sure. Start with this discussion with your teams. I'm more than happy to come in and do that with you, but you could take the material too from the white paper and share it with your teams and start talking about what mindsets do you have when you show up at work. It'll change the language that people use to describe what's going on in the workplace once you have these conversations. Let's see. Resilience is so important to develop. One of the major issues for many women physicians is the gender difference in salary. How do you find out if we're being paid equally? Well, I think first of all is realizing that you have the power and realizing that it's not about you, but it's about giving. And coming in with that attitude of if you're working hard to make your team successful and the teams around you successful, you've taken the time to work with the teams outside of your team, like going to administration and saying, what keeps you guys up at night? What are you celebrating? How can I help you be successful? And you develop those kinds of relationships so that there's this value and this conduit between different levels within your organization. You become so valuable. It gives you the right to come in and have the conversation of, I've invested in this organization. I believe in it. I'm not just engaged. I'm invested. I care about this place. But I have a question about salary differences based on gender, and I was wondering if we could have a conversation about that. So I think it's a very reasonable and important conversation to have, but I would start from this position of the thriver mindset. If you start from the position of the victim's mindset or the controller mindset or the bystander mindset, it's going to be difficult to get traction and actually change a system that needs to be changed. Teresa's typing. Okay, great. Any other questions? We've got a couple minutes left here. By the way, when you text us 66866 and text Diamond, there's a feedback form, and I would love to get your feedback on if this was helpful information and what was helpful. So thank you in advance for taking the time to give me that feedback. It's very helpful for me. This is my passion. This is what I'm doing full-time now, is working with hospitals and healthcare organizations and healthcare folks on how to make a difference. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Tony.